Right now, it's impossible for me to bring my family back to the UK safely. Well, to start with, the only time I come back to the UK is tonight. The royal family broke its own bloodline. At exactly 8:45 p.m. on October 23, 2025, Buckingham Palace put out a statement that rocked the British monarchy to its core. In calm royal language that could barely hide the storm underneath, it confirmed that King Charles III has decided to remove both Prince Harry and Prince Andrew from the royal line, who gets the throne next. The words were simple, but the meaning was crushing. His Majesty supports a legal process to redefine who's next in line in order to protect the stability and honor of the monarchy. It sounded official, even careful. But to those who know the hidden language of the palace, this was a bombshell. A king had just redrawn the map of his own family. Within minutes, major TV networks across London interrupted regular programming. BBC news anchors spoke with unusual seriousness. ITV flashed the headline, "Royal Line Redefined." And across the Atlantic, CNN called it the most shocking royal move in nearly 100 years. Outside Buckingham Palace, a stunned crowd gathered in the cold October wind, candles, British flags, and confused whispers filling the night air. For many British people, this moment felt like it was coming. After years of scandal, Andrew's disgrace, Harry's rebellion, the cracks had grown too wide to ignore. But for others, this was unthinkable. A father pushing away his own son, and a brother left behind as a reminder of royal shame. Inside the palace, the hallways reportedly went silent. Sources say Queen Camilla retreated to her private office, tearful but holding it together. Prince William, serious and still, stood beside his father as the announcement went public. It wasn't anger, said one insider. It was exhaustion. The king just couldn't carry their weight anymore. And yet, questions now swirl like fall leaves across Britain. How far does this change go? Can Parliament truly rewrite the royal bloodline? And what does it mean for the monarchy's future when even its family ties are no longer sacred? Stay with me, because behind this announcement lies a story of power, loss, and sacrifice that could change the crown forever. To understand how Britain reached this crazy turning point, we have to step back through the hallways of scandal, duty, and heartbreak that have haunted the royal family for years. This wasn't a decision made quickly. It was the result of quiet pressure, whispered doubts, and a king wrestling with his legacy while time and illness pushed hard against him. It began in February 2024, when Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles had been diagnosed with cancer. At first, the nation rallied. Messages poured in from across the Commonwealth, and the king's calm attitude reassured millions. He's working through treatment. Read the palace statement. A line repeated on every news broadcast. But behind that toughness, the reality was way more fragile. Those close to the king noticed his growing tiredness. The slower walk, the longer pauses between official events. Still, he pushed on, determined to rule with quiet dignity. But even as he fought to keep his health, another battle played out. One for the moral credibility of the monarchy itself. The two names that had cast the longest shadows, Andrew and Harry, refused to fade from public consciousness. Prince Andrew's connections to Jeffrey Epstein continued to stain the royal image. Though he had retreated into silence at his Royal Lodge home, public anger had not. Newspapers revisited the scandal each time new details came out about Epstein's network. Then came October 17, 2025. The day Andrew voluntarily gave up the title. Duke of York. What should have been an act of saying sorry only reminded the public of how far he had fallen. Across the Atlantic, Prince Harry's story took a different shape, but carried equal weight. His lawsuits against the British tabloids and his continued criticism of the royal family left little room for making up. When Spare was released, it wasn't just a book about his life. It was a line in the sand. By 2025, Harry and Meghan had built their own empire in California. But to many British people, they represented betrayal, not independence. For King Charles, these two wounds, one of disgrace, the other of disloyalty, had never fully healed. And as his own health grew uncertain, advisors began to ask the question no king wants to hear. What happens next? The answer, it seems, started forming quietly inside Clarence House, with the advice of Queen Camilla and Prince William. The king started considering what he called the preservation plan, a vision for making sure the monarchy's moral integrity survived beyond his reign. Those discussions would lead to the announcement we now know, a legal act of both strength and sorrow. But before it could happen, there were nights of hesitation, voices in opposition, and more than one confrontation that threatened to tear the palace apart. Because in the House of Windsor, every decision made for the crown leaves a crack in the family, and those cracks were about to become earthquakes. Behind the fancy facade of Buckingham Palace, October had been a month of uneasy quiet. On the outside, the royal calendar moved forward, charity visits, photo opportunities, memorial services. But inside the palace, a way more delicate operation was happening. Meetings that were never officially scheduled began taking place in the evenings at Clarence House, where King Charles and his closest advisors gathered to discuss what aides quietly began calling the succession integrity review. Around that long oak table sat the monarchy's most trusted people, Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary, Queen Camilla, steady and protective, and Prince William, representing the future in both symbolism and strategy. William rarely spoke in those meetings, at least at first. Observers said he listened, his expressions still but thoughtful, weighing every word. When he did speak, it was usually measured and calm, though there was steel beneath the restraint. The institution must be cleaner than any one name, he reportedly said during one session, according to a palace aide. If we lose the public's trust, titles mean nothing. For Camilla, the tone was more personal. They're still family, she warned, her voice soft but firm. We can't look like we're cutting blood to save face. Those close to her describe how she quietly fought to make sure the announcement would sound legal, not cruel, an act of duty, not revenge. Still, the air in the room was tense. The king's illness had returned to the front of every conversation, his health, going from promising to fragile in the space of weeks. Even when he looked composed, those who loved him knew the toll the treatments were taking. And maybe that was what made this moment so urgent. The realization that Charles might not have years to wait for public forgiveness. Andrew's case came first. Since giving up his Duke of York title on October 17th, his isolation had gotten deeper. His daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, visited him often at Royal Lodge, where he spent most days pacing the gardens and reading old military journals. Friends said he remained convinced he could one day regain respect, but even among his defenders, hope had faded. One courtier described him bluntly. He's become a ghost, haunting his own house. Removing Andrew from the line of succession, even symbolically, would be complicated, but not impossible. The Succession to the Crown Act 2013 placed the matter under parliamentary oversight, requiring coordination across all Commonwealth realms, a legal maze that would take months. But for the monarchy, perception often mattered more than paperwork. The king's statement on October 23rd would not erase Andrew's name by law. But it would do something arguably more powerful. It would define the royal line by moral worth, not just birthright. Harry's situation was different, messier, more emotional. The king's aides described it as the wound that keeps reopening, while Andrew represented scandal. Harry symbolized heartbreak. His absence at family gatherings, his memoirs' bitterness, and his public remarks about the royal family's invisible contract with the press had left deep scars. Yet even as he criticized the crown, he remained its son. And in Charles's heart, That contradiction hurt. Queen Camilla, aware of the king's emotional pain, insisted that Harry's name be addressed carefully. "We can't exile a child," she told advisors. "We can only acknowledge the distance he's already chosen." But William was more practical. Privately, he argued that Harry's ongoing lawsuits and media projects made royal reconciliation impossible, while keeping the monarchy's credibility demanded clear boundaries. When the decision was finally written, the exact wording that would appear in the palace statement, it was William who reviewed the final version. The phrasing was careful, legalistic, and free of emotion. His Majesty supports a parliamentary process. It was legal poetry, unassailable, emotionless, and deeply final. In the hours before the public release, the king reportedly sat alone in his private study, rereading the document. Those present say he signed it with a single nod, then whispered something few could hear. It must be done. Outside, London's night was calm and wet, the lamps of the mall reflecting on wet pavement. Within the palace, no one cheered or cried. There was only the soft sound of footsteps fading down marble halls, the quiet echo of a decision that had redrawn centuries of royal tradition. By dawn, copies of the statement had been sent to all senior Commonwealth governments. By noon, the world would know what had happened. And by evening, two princes, one disgraced, one estranged, would stand outside the circle of power their births had once promised. The monarchy, in turn, would wake to its most fragile morning, yet not divided, but forever changed. It was a gray, overcast afternoon in London when the official statement was released. The kind of weather that makes even good news feel gloomy. But on October 23, 2025, the palace announcement wasn't good news at all. It was a declaration that would mark a line in royal history. King Charles III, after months of private thinking, had supported a parliamentary process to remove Prince Andrew and Prince Harry from the royal line of succession. The message arrived not through a televised address or dramatic press conference, but through a simple, dignified letter stamped with the royal seal. It was brief, a single page of careful language written to sound legal rather than emotional. But every word carried the weight of heartbreak. The monarchy in its most ancient form had chosen to tighten its circle. As the statement spread through media networks, the world seemed to pause. In Britain, news anchors read it with grave tones. In Washington and Sydney, commentators analyzed its implications for the Commonwealth. BBC News called it an act of royal realism, while the New York Times described it as a family tragedy dressed in protocol. The crowd outside Buckingham Palace grew hour by hour. Some brought flowers, others candles. One man wrapped in a British flag said quietly to a reporter, "I grew up watching those boys. I never thought it would come to this." A king outliving his son's loyalty. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was restrained but tense. Queen Camilla was said to be pale and withdrawn, staying close to her husband. She had urged him to delay the decision until his health stabilized. But Charles, frail yet determined, had insisted that unfinished matters weigh heavier than illness. His private secretary later told aides the king feared leaving behind a mess for William to clean up. This was his last act of clarity. For William, the hours following the announcement were a study in composure. Dressed in a black suit and blue tie, he appeared at a scheduled event in Manchester the next morning, shaking hands, smiling faintly, but saying nothing of the night before. Cameras caught the quiet tension in his face, the same mix of sorrow and discipline once seen in his grandmother. When a journalist shouted, "Your Royal Highness, how is His Majesty coping?" William simply replied, "Doing what he's always done, putting duty first." Behind the calm exterior, however, the ripple effects were immediate. Within the government, the Privy Council office began reviewing potential legal adjustments. Knowing that any change to succession law required consultation with all 15 Commonwealth realms. It was a legal maze, but the symbolism mattered more than the legal outcome. It's not about laws. One political correspondent explained on Sky News, "It's about setting a moral example." Across the Atlantic, the news landed differently. In California, Prince Harry and Meghan's spokesperson released a short, dignified message. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have no comment at this time. Their focus remains on family and humanitarian work. Yet palace watchers couldn't help noting the absence of empathy in those words. No reference to the king, no acknowledgement of the institution that had just erased their royal future. In New York, American media framed it as a generational shift. A monarchy choosing merit over blood, declared one headline. Meanwhile, Australian commentators were divided. Some praised Charles for decisive leadership. Others questioned whether tradition was giving way to corporate-style branding. If you're watching this now, I'd love to hear what you think. Should the monarchy still protect family ties above all? Or has the modern world demanded that even royalty be accountable to its own standards? And tell me, where in the world are you watching from tonight? It's fascinating to see how perspectives differ between London, New York, and Sydney when it comes to power, legacy, and forgiveness. Back in Britain, the royal household moved to shape the story. Palace sources told reporters the king was resting and reflective, while emphasizing that the bot decision had been discussed within the family. Yet insiders whispered that Prince Andrew had been blindsided, informed only hours before the announcement. His daughters left to read about it online. One friend of the Duke described him as humiliated but strangely calm, as if the fight was finally over. Harry, on the other hand, was said to have reacted with quiet disbelief. A California-based journalist close to the Sussex circle claimed he'd received the news by text from a palace contact, replying only with the words, "It had to end this way, didn't it?" Whether that quote was true or not, it captured the tone of the moment, resignation, not rage. As evening fell, the palace balcony remained empty. The flag fluttered at half-mast, though no official mourning had been declared. In the chapel at Windsor, prayers were offered for the strength and unity of the royal family. And somewhere between those marble walls and flickering candles, a tired king sat beside his desk, staring at the portraits of his sons. Two faces frozen in happier times. "It's done," he whispered to Camilla. "I've done what the crown required. But I'll never stop being their father." That sentence, more than the announcement itself, summed up the tragedy of the night. A king had secured his legacy, but a father had lost his peace. And as the cameras captured London's skyline shimmering under the rain, it felt as though Britain itself was learning the hardest truth of all, that even in palaces, love has limits. As the dust settled over London, the two men at the center of the storm stood on opposite sides of the world, both exiled in different ways, both bound by the same last name that now felt more like a curse than a crown. At Royal Lodge in Windsor, Prince Andrew spent the morning pacing the gardens he once proudly hosted garden parties in. The news of his removal from the line of succession had reached him before the public announcement, but barely. A senior aide had delivered the message in person the previous evening. Witnesses described Andrew as pale, silent, and strangely still. For a man who had spent years denying, bargaining, and retreating, there was nothing left to defend. Inside the lodge, his daughters Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie tried to shield him from the frenzy outside, but the headlines were impossible to ignore. "Prince without a future," screamed the Daily Mail. "Final exile," echoed The Guardian. To the public, it was justice. To his family, it was grief. "He's not angry anymore," said one close friend. "Just broken." Andrew's fall had been years in the making. His association with Jeffrey Epstein had left wounds the monarchy couldn't heal. The legal settlement in 2022, rumored to have cost millions, had bought silence, but not forgiveness. Even after giving up his Duke of York title on October 17th, his presence remained a problem. A living reminder of a royal era that tolerated arrogance without accountability. The king's announcement then wasn't cruelty. It was closure. But if Andrew's exile was about disgrace, Harry's was about distance and disappointment. Thousands of miles away in Montecito, California, Prince Harry woke to a storm of alerts on his phone. Palace statements, TV headlines, and text messages from British journalists all said the same thing. He was out. A friend told the Telegraph that Harry read the news alone in his office before walking out to the garden, visibly shaken. He didn't speak for 10 minutes, the source said. Then he just said, "It's final now." For years, Harry had been the self-proclaimed spare, the royal who tried to build purpose outside tradition. But by 2025, his mission had blurred. His Netflix projects had lost steam. His lawsuits with the British press dragged on, and his relationship with his family seemed more distant than ever. "The world misunderstood him," said one American commentator. But the palace stopped trying to understand it all. The decision to formally remove Harry from the line of succession wasn't about legal necessity. It was symbolic. It told the world that the institution had survived without him and would continue to do so. Yet for King Charles, the symbolism carried a deeper pain. Those close to the king say he had resisted the idea for months, hoping for reconciliation. He always believed Harry would come home, a palace aide revealed. But home only exists if both sides open the door. Behind closed doors, Prince William had been the quiet architect of the new order. He'd long believed that the monarchy couldn't rebuild trust without drawing boundaries. Harry's constant public complaints about press intrusion, about the institution's coldness, about being overshadowed had become an anchor, dragging the family's image down. For William, this wasn't revenge. It was repair. Meanwhile, Camilla played her part as the voice of compassion. She had pushed for softer language in the announcement, removing phrases like revocation or exclusion, replacing them with constitutional process and support for integrity. To her, the monarchy wasn't just an institution. It was a family barely holding itself together. Public reaction to Harry's removal was mixed. In Britain, 68% of poll respondents told YouGov they supported the king's decision. In the United States, however, sentiment was split. Many Americans viewed it as unnecessary punishment. "He didn't betray the country," one viewer wrote online. "He just wanted to live freely." But in the end, perception mattered less than permanence. The royal family had made its choice, and the world had taken its sides. As the sun set that evening, both men, one in Windsor, one in California, stood in separate gardens under the same twilight sky. Two brothers in all but spirit, two sons now written out of the destiny that had once defined them. In his journal that night, the king reportedly wrote a single line. "History spares no one, not even its heirs." The words would never be released publicly. But they spoke for a family that had traded its bloodline for survival. And for a king who knew the price of peace was the silence of his sons. In the days following the king's announcement, the aftershocks rippled far beyond Buckingham Palace. The decision to support the removal of Prince Harry and Prince Andrew from the line of succession had not just shaken a family, it had stirred an empire. Across Britain, public opinion split sharply along generational and emotional lines. For older citizens who remembered Queen Elizabeth II's era of discipline, Charles's move was seen as overdue. "It's about time," said a retired government worker outside Windsor. The monarchy survived this long because it cleans its own house. But for younger British people raised on documentaries and social media transparency, the decision felt cold. "It's like watching your grandfather erase his children," one woman posted online. Duty shouldn't come without compassion. The BBC hosted a national forum titled "The Crown and Accountability." Legal experts debated whether the monarchy's symbolic purity justified such deep personal cost. "The British crown doesn't just rule," said historian Robert Lacey. "It reflects. Every time it chooses duty over family, It tells us something about our own society that we prize order even when it breaks hearts. Meanwhile, the political machinery began to turn. The Privy Council confirmed that discussions were underway to coordinate with the Commonwealth realms Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and others, should legal recognition be required. Each realm must consent to any change of succession law, explained the clerk of the council. But this is largely symbolic. The king's statement was moral, not legal. Still, even the symbolism carried diplomatic consequences. In Ottawa and Canberra, Republican politicians seized the moment to renew debates on independence. Within Britain's own parliament, the tone was more restrained. Prime Minister Alastair Graham urged unity. Calling the king's decision a courageous act of moral clarity, the leader of the opposition agreed in principle, but added pointedly, "We should not forget that the monarchy's strength lies as much in its humanity as its hierarchy." It was a rare day when the House of Commons stood nearly united, yet the nation beyond remained conflicted. Inside the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury issued a pastoral reflection that captured the sentiment of many. The crown may choose its course through the law, but hearts must choose forgiveness. Without it, no kingdom, divine or earthly, can truly endure. His words were read aloud at Sunday services across the country, met with quiet nods and candlelight vigils. Beyond Britain, the story dominated headlines. In Washington, late-night anchors debated whether the decision was necessary reform or royal betrayal. In Sydney, columnists framed it as a monarchy shedding sentiment to survive the century. And in Toronto, newspapers printed side-by-side photographs, one of Charles at his coronation, the other of him, now thinner, older, eyes heavy under the caption, "The weight of a crown for the palace." It was an unprecedented communication challenge. Senior aides coordinated carefully worded press briefings, emphasizing stability. There is no succession crisis. The king remains committed to service. The Prince of Wales continues his duties, and the monarchy stands united in purpose. Yet even within those statements, a quiet admission lingered. Unity had come at a terrible cost. Inside Clarence House, Charles's doctors advised him to rest more often. But he continued reading his red dispatch boxes daily, sometimes late into the night. It's as though he fears stopping will make him vanish, one courtier said. Camilla tried to persuade him to pause, reminding him that the monarchy was at last steady again. His answer was faint but clear. Steady, yes, but still bleeding, by the week's end. Flags across the Commonwealth fluttered in soft autumn winds, symbols of endurance perhaps, or resilience earned through sacrifice. The monarchy had survived another test. Its structure intact, its heart diminished. And though the announcement was meant to secure the future, Britain sensed something irreversible had changed. The royal family now seemed more human than ever noble. Yes, but wounded in ways even the crown could not conceal. For the first time in generations, the monarchy had proven its ability to endure by doing the one thing it feared most, letting go. As autumn deepened over London, the chill in the air seemed to mirror the quiet unease within the royal household. Buckingham Palace had returned to its usual rhythm, guards changing, carriages passing, the clock striking the hour, but nothing felt the same. The monarchy had survived yet another reckoning, but this time the cost had been personal. In drawing a line through his own bloodline, King Charles III had done what few kings before him ever dared. He put principle before sentiment, duty before family. And in doing so, he forced an entire nation to face an uncomfortable truth that even the oldest institution on earth is held together not by divine right, but by human frailty. The image of the king signing the document that confirmed the removal of Harry and Andrew has already become iconic. A tired but determined man choosing legacy over love. To some, it was the ultimate act of leadership. To others, an irreversible heartbreak. But maybe both are true. Because leadership at its purest is never clean. It's sacrifice disguised as order. I think about that often, about what it must mean to be both a father and a king. To see your son stumble. To know your name carries the weight of their mistakes. And to realize that mercy and monarchy rarely coexist. It's easy to judge from the outside, but within those gilded halls, every act of discipline comes with its own ghost, the whisper of what could have been if love had been enough. And yet, there's a strange kind of grace in what happened. For the first time in years, the monarchy feels human again. Not perfect, not untouchable, human. The decision to formally distance the crown from two of its most controversial figures was meant to protect its future. But it also reminded the world that power does not spare anyone from heartbreak, not even kings. Look closer, and you'll see that this is not just a royal story. It's a mirror. Families everywhere know this struggle between holding on and letting go, between forgiveness and self-preservation. Charles's choice may seem ruthless, but at its core, it's something many parents understand. The painful need to step back when love no longer leads to peace. And maybe that's the lesson this moment leaves us with. That even the mightiest thrones cannot withstand the corrosion of unresolved wounds. That silence, distance, and pride, those familiar ghosts haunt even the corridors of Buckingham Palace. The difference is that when they fall silent, the world hears the echo. Still, there's one thing the monarchy has always done better than anyone: survive. It bends, it reshapes. It learns to endure through reinvention. And in that endurance, there's something profoundly British. A resilience built not from triumph, but from the ability to keep standing through sorrow. Prince William now stands at the edge of that new era, his father's decision clearing the path for his own future reign. He inherits not just the throne, but the scars of a generation that fought to modernize the monarchy while keeping its mystique intact. And beside him, Queen Camilla remains the quiet pillar, calm, dignified. Never forgetting that power without compassion becomes emptiness. It's tempting to call this the end of an era, but maybe it's something else, the beginning of one defined not by titles or scandals, but by transparency, boundaries, and the courage to admit imperfection. The House of Windsor has always been a stage, but now, for once, the audience sees the actors as real people, tired, flawed, and trying their best to keep a centuries-old story alive. And that perhaps is what keeps millions around the world watching. Not because they envy royalty, but because in their struggle, they see reflections of their own. Families torn between duty and love. Parents doing what hurts because they believe it's right. Sons and daughters drifting away, then realizing too late what was lost. As I reflect on all this, I find myself wondering, was the king's act an ending or a redemption? Maybe both. Because sometimes healing begins not with reunion, but with acknowledgement. The quiet courage to face what's broken and let time decide if it can ever be repaired. And now, dear viewers, I turn the question to you. Was King Charles right to make this decision to protect the monarchy at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing his son's places in history? Or should blood always come before the crown? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and tell me too, where in the world are you watching from? It's fascinating how perspectives differ across continents, yet pain always feels the same.